be talking about your edit or update form. Many people are on this stage right here, so I just wanted to cover it with you for a second. And what we have here is my my update form, and it's called Edit Fox. Notice that I title it with UI so that it's a better way to discriminate it from React components. So I want to discriminate my Figma components with React components, so that's why I use the UI in front of the word there. And one thing that I did is I changed this edit word to about 8 points or so, because I want to use this label to show exactly which database object that I'm looking at, and I want the ID to show here, and it's pretty long, and I don't, and so I'm just going to use that for testing. You'll see that in a moment. And here's the profile picture. Now, one thing that's important to do on your update form is to make the placeholder, set the placeholder here and not in the Studio UI library, because we'll be changing that later with the real data. But here you should be clicking down to it, and if you keep clicking, you might have to click like 6 times and it'll finally get down to the text. So you could see here on the browser on the left that it got down to the placeholder text, and then you could change the information there. So so we could make that, Jane Fox. And then you could see that I'm showing with the placeholder text, it shows the user or leads them into what kind of information we're expecting. So that you have that all there. We've got that set up the way that we want to. We're going to go back to Studio, and we're going to we're going to sync. Go to the Studio library, and we're going to sync with Figma. So that's syncing right now. It brought in the change, and I'm going to accept the change. And here we have it. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you. Let's see here. Okay, so you could see that it's pre-populated that area because, but the first thing you're going to do is, when you configure it, I've said this before, it's very important that you use this browser to the left, and start at the very top point and make sure it's highlighted here in the browser to the left. And then you could see that that's looking at the whole component properties, and this label that the name for the component is very important. I usually keep a short word, and it's usually the same name as the object, all lowercase, of the model that we're the object model name. The model name here I've shortened it a little bit to FX, and that's the first thing that you're going to do. The second thing you're going to do is to, if you want to, use another text on your form, like this edit text, and then you're going to set the child properties. You're going to click on the plus, and you're going to change that label. So the property is going to be label, and you're going to set it to the ID of the record ID. So that's FX ID. And so that's why it's populating with the database ID. And that's helping me to do some troubleshooting if I need to do that later. This image, profile image here, you could see that has a child property of SRC. I picked SRC, and the value I'm going to get for it is the FX SRC. So that comes from this field that people enter. And then here's this place in the form that's a little bit different than we've talked about before. Instead of you're going to add a child property. So start with the browser side, highlight this text thing. And then instead of doing placeholder, you need to have value. And then the value that you want to grab from the database or the content is FX. For me, it's FX name. And then I go to the second one, value. This is my, it's not the database ID, but it's my Fox ID. And then the third one, value, is the SRC. And then let's drop down to this button. And this button, the last part, you're going to have two child properties. One child property is your on click. And so on click, you're going to update. So you're gonna pick update, and then the database model, and then be sure that you put the database ID. This is not my ID that I showed the user, it's the database ID. And then it's going to go ahead and prompt you to tell where does the FID come from, which comes from this field right here, where does the name come from, where does the SRC come from, and then you're done with the one property. And then you're going to add another property, and that's what I'm showing here. And on mouse up, so after I click and my mouse comes up, I'm going to say that I want to go to URL. So on mouse up, you're going to have to find that in the list, go to URL, and then I'm going to go back to the root URL because that's going to take me back to my collection. So this is how you set up the UI edit or update form. And if you need any help, we can talk about it in class.